At 9:51, Murali Ranganathan, a Mumbai-based researcher with interest in the 19th century. If you're interested in some of his other work, he's translated Govind Narayan's Mumbai, an urban biography from 1863, and edited the collected works of J.V. Nayak, Reform and Renaissance in 19th century Maharashtra, and now edits JRB Jeejeebhoys Bombay Vignettes, Explorations in the History of Bombay, published by the Asiatic Society. It's available at the Asiatic Society. It's available at Kitabkhana and shortly in a week's time on all online stores. The last leg of conversation with Murali.
This is Good Morning Mumbai with Hrishi K.
So, your favorite pieces in the book? Tell us about them.
Actually, there are quite a few favorite pieces, but we'll talk about two pieces which we haven't talked about yet. One is something he calls Flight in the East, Tragedies of Early Bombay Attempts. And, flying is something which fascinated humans for a long time. We have our Pushpak Vimanas, we have our Icarus, and so on and so forth. But the real thing started only after the balloon was sort of, experimented with in France. And it took almost 70 years and one crazy man for the balloon to come into India in the 1850s. And he started in this man, Mr. Kite. I mean, he was named Kight, and very proverbially named Mr. Kite. He sort of got a balloon made, and it was a hydrogen gas balloon, not a helium one. And it was one of the most dangerous things you could do, short of suicide. It was everything else. And he's sort of made his way from Calcutta to Bombay to Madras, and then sort of rounded the Cape and came to Bombay in 1853. And Jeejeebhoy talks about the attempt. I mean, Govind Narayan also talks about in Govind Narayan's Mumbai, and Jeejeebhoy sort of excavates the old newspaper reports and talks about the first two failed attempts, and then finally the first successful attempt after almost a year of trying, and then Kite disappears. His balloon crashes in the sea next to Malabar Hill, and he just disappears. And that's where Jeejeebhoy's story stops, because he couldn't perhaps get the next issues of the newspapers. But if Jeejeebhoy had got them, he would have found out that after 4 days and being picked up in the middle of the sea by a ship going to Surat, Mr. Kite comes back to Bombay triumphant but perhaps a little wet. So that was the first flight in Bombay, and he talks about that. So that was a tragedy just prevented perhaps. But after that, almost all the attempts were tragedies. Many balloonists died, and many experimental aircrafts which came into Bombay also sort of had a very, very tough time. And so he talks about many of those tragedies, and if you go to the Sivri cemetery, you will find a couple of graves of these balloonists. And he doesn't talk about the very hyped movie sort of attempt was made. I mean, there are hints in the newspapers, but clearly they were not. I mean, Jeejeebhoy thinks that they wouldn't qualify as an attempt to fly. So that's what he talks about that. And the another article which sort of is sort of almost relevant to us, and we take it for granted, is keeping the Sabbath. That is devoting the day Sunday for non-commercial purposes, for non-recreational purposes, but for devotional purposes. And the kind of regulations which the East India Company sort of promulgated to ensure that Sunday was a day of rest, and Sunday was a day in which you contemplated God. But there were always renegades both in the European side as well as the Indians who had never heard of a Sunday before, and they continued working. So there were a lot of conflicts in those years about keeping the Sabbath. The Indians were confused, and so on. But finally, now we are all off on a Sunday. So I guess the Sabbath guys won in a way. But maybe we don't really use it the way it should be done. But there are some very humorous incidents which Jeejeebhoy sort of excavates from the legal records. I mean, people had cases thrown against them for this. And even from the newspapers, he sort of finds out quite a few of these incidents which sort of went towards finally making Sunday a universal holiday.
So how does this book fit in with the rest of your work on Bombay history?
Rishi, my job is to, is to excavate. I mean, I really don't think there's any other term for it. I mean, much of our libraries and archives are now become excavation grounds in a way. A lot of the old cataloging systems are sort of out of place. Many of them are transiting from physical libraries to digital libraries, and it is tough to find original stuff. I mean, in terms of, let's say, original newspapers, original magazines, they are all crumbling literally to the touch, and literally one has to sort of, sort of push away layers of dust and layers physically as well as mentally to sort of get to these to many of the original sources of the history of Bombay and Western India. So I'm exploring a whole raft of resources, and this book sort of comes from my overall explorations, and that's how I found out about the existence of Jeejeebhoy in the first place, and then realized after a few years that he was a very prolific man, and certainly this book was worth it. So it really sort of emerged from my research, which I've been doing for the last 12 odd years on the city of Bombay, its sources, its archives, and this has taken me all across the country, and it would perhaps take me abroad too if I can manage that.
Murali, thank you for your time. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Rishi. It's nice back being
Cheers.
here. Thank you so much.
Messages are back.